Okay, there we go. I hit the participants link. I thought it looked really weird. I was saying it's been just a busy week. That's what it's been. Probably for you all too. We started school today. Even though it was all virtual, but we have in our town, we have it set up so that like all the staff they go in. So we're providing childcare for the staff children so that they can actually like be there and be focused on doing virtual school. So it's been a little crazy today. Oh, that sounds like a dog.
Spelling is mutual.
Oh, she's like, and she muted. I was like, that sounded like a dog playing with a toy. So how has everyone else's week gone? Pretty good. I can't believe that we're already on our third class. I feel like these fly by. Oh, okay, there's my chat. Oh my gosh, you have a hurricane headed. That's not good. Hopefully you have supplies and all the stuff you need to be hurricane prepared. With the staff little, yeah. Which somebody else was saying, you can have them in the class, then why couldn't you just have everybody else? So that was kind of, I'm like, I know what you mean. You can have a class of 15 but they're not doing, they're doing some online work, but they're still in the school.
So
maybe.
Let me grab my soda.
Where is it?
On the table.
Yes, it is, and it has helped tremendously. I don't know if you all have any teacher friends or people that work in the school system trying to do non-traditional instruction or virtual instruction while you're at home and you're trying to take care of the kids that you have at home as well. I had a lot of friends that was driving them insane, trying to do online to teach, and then they have their little kids at home with them. Like, that was impossible. Yeah, did Catholics start back just today, or did they start? I know here city schools started on Monday, but Catholic may have started today. Oh, they started on Monday. Hopefully that's going well, and hopefully that's what we will be at soon. Does anybody have any questions about anything so far? I thought that these two chapters 3 and 4, we could spend, well, on the chapter 3, we could probably spend a class talking about the theories, like a whole class on the theories that are in this book, in chapter 3. Oh, that stinks. I hope your daughter feels better soon. And the same, like 4, like there's just a ton of material in these two chapters. So I just kind of went through and picked out some of the highlights that I thought were important for you all. But I do hope that you spent some time and hopefully you read. There was a lot of reading as well. And I think next week, I had it pulled up. I think next week is actually 3 chapters. So that's going to be a ton of work. Oh, hold on. Mary, if you will email me some information on that, and usually there's a form that goes along with that. And then let me know a little more information as far as when that's due and things like that. Oh, you sent that to me privately. I'm so sorry. I just now saw that. But if you'll just email me, that would be awesome. So no other questions about anything? You feeling okay about this class so far? Hopefully the work hasn't been too terribly much. I do know that what you have coming up for the next week, you'll have either a quiz or you have a paper you have to write. But this is one of those weeks I talked about where you also have an additional assignment. So if you remember, normally you have you pick from those 2 assignments and you pick one, but you're also going to have a reading summary this week. And it is, I think it's a 2 to 3 page paper, and you have to pull it from like a social work journal or some kind of scholarly journal, and you are going to summarize the article. And it talks about that you're going to pick a topic that has to do with minorities and how diversity comes into play. I think that's right, because I looked at it right before I got on here. But it gives you a good description. So I just want to make sure and point that out, that you're going to either do the quiz, and then you'll have like that 1-page paper. You pick one of those, and then you're also going to have to do the reading summary. So do not forget to do that. I believe there's 2 reading summaries in this class. Well, I want to make sure that you still feel like you're learning too in this class, but I just thought that it was a bit excessive on the workload to have to do three things and then an additional something. So hopefully you still leave this class with a lot of good information, even though we took some of the work off. I probably never had a student that would get mad over having a little less work in a class, but I feel like when you take just a little bit of that off, it relaxes you a little bit more to really learn the information too, and you're not just kind of checking off stuff. So hopefully you leave with a lot more information than when you started this class. Okay, so if we look at, I'll go ahead and start on chapter 3. If nobody has any more questions. All right, so we talked about how this book is designed, that you're looking at child development, then you're going to look at adolescence, middle adulthood, or adulthood, middle adulthood, how it's in those different sections, and then it breaks those down biologically, psychologically, all of those for us. So when we look at chapter 3, it's going to be psychological development of infancy and childhood. And there's a ton of theory that is in chapter 3. And some of the biggest, like the first one I thought we would talk about is Sigmund Freud. So if you will write in the chat box something that when you hear Sigmund Freud, what do you think of? Like what comes to mind? And the theories that we're going to talk about in this chapter, they have to do with personality development. So how their personalities are developed, how they learn, and different people have different ways that they think that occurs. Because it gives a good definition of personality. It says it's a complex cluster of mental, emotional, and behavioral characteristics that distinguish a person as an individual. So, what we want to find out is what are those individual behavioral characteristics. Let's see, what do you have? Yes, I don't know. Bertha, I'll look on yours, like if something is missing on there. I'll make a note to check that. Okay, so I love that Leah said brilliance. I think Freud's very interesting to study too. Study of children, yes. Repression, it's a good one. And probably one of the biggest ones is the id, ego, and superego. Does anybody want to, we'll do it in like smaller pieces, take a stab at how you would define the id? Everybody's like, So he said the mom was developed, had three parts. There you go. The id is made up of needs and wants. It's like our most basic needs, very instinctual. That's a good one. It's very primitive. So when you think about the id, we're talking about hunger, thirst, sex, self-preservation, all of those basic primal needs that we have. So what do you think that he defines the ego as? Yep, that's good. Trying to figure out how to get it. It's that's an excellent way to describe it too. What Kaylee said, a mediator between the id and the superego. It's the rational piece. That's a good one that describes it too. It also controls a person's thinking. And your book says it's kind of, I like this sentence. It says it's the coordinator of personality. So the ego is trying to evaluate. It's trying to evaluate outcomes too. It's trying to evaluate consequences of the actions that are taking place. So it's a good one to think of it as that mediator between the id and the superego. So what would you define the superego as? That's the third component. Exactly. You all know your Freud. The superego is the conscience. So the main function of the superego is, like Bertha said, to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. And it gives a really good example of how the three work together. It talks about a little girl, and there's some kind of toy that she wants. The toy costs $45. She only has $26.67. So what do you think that her id, what is her id wanting her to do? Steal it. Yes. The id is saying you just need to take it. It goes back to that like pleasure principle, the need, I need it. I have to have it. So it's probably just, the id's just saying, we're just going to take it. And it talks about the ego. The ego reasons that she could slip the horse under her jacket and race out of the store. But it also encourages her to see if anyone is watching. So it's kind of, it's in the middle, trying to work out different scenarios. She's just about to do it when the superego comes in. And what do you think the superego tells her to do about taking the toy? Exactly, that it's wrong. So remember that super ego is going to come in and tell us, it's our conscience, whether or not it's right or wrong. But I think that that's such a good, it's a very basic, I don't know why my light, it looks like it's dark. It's a very good example of how that brain is working to figure out what those consequences are, to navigate between our natural wants and desires, and how we work that out. And then I think it's the ego that comes back in at the end that thinks, okay, how much, how can I earn the rest of the money in order to purchase this toy? So we're back to that rational mediator in between those choices. It reminds me, like when you talk about this, like the devil on one side and the angel on the other side, trying to make that right decision. So that's probably what that, and we talk about like personality development. And that's the next part of this, but that is one of the main things that Freud is known for, is personality development, and the founder of psychoanalysis. And that is looking, like he has these stages. I think they start, I'm on page 98 in your book. But when he talks about psychoanalysis, I think it's 5 stages. Let's see, I had them written down for you. There's and I'm sure you've heard these before. And I want to point out what Natalie said. It's really interesting when you're looking at what Freud believes and thinking about culture and diversity. Like, where does that play a role in what that person decides what is right and what is wrong? That's a very interesting point. So Freud, he has these phases of what he calls psychosexual and personality development. That's when we're talking about psychoanalysis. The first one is the oral phase. And this phase goes from birth to approximately 18 months. And it's when a child is fixated on feeding, mouth, lips, tongue, anything associated with that function. You ever hear, I always tell my daughter that she is stuck in that phase because she likes to chew on things. She hates it when I say that. But some people can, Freud will say some people that are fixated at that stage later in life are thought to have severe personality disorders such as schizophrenic, psychotic depression. So this is his way of treating mental illness. What Freud's big thing is he says that things that happen to us in our childhood affect us greatly later in life. And that's his theory that he uses to explain a lot of human behavior. So that's the oral phase. There's an anal phase, and that's going to be 18 months to 3 years old. And that's when a child is primarily focused on going to the bathroom issues, releasing, bowel training. That's what they call it. Then the next stage is phallic stage, and that is from 3 to 5. And in this stage is when he says kids are obsessed with their genitals. This has to do, like, if you have kids that touch themselves, genital stimulation, you're probably in class going, really? This is what we're talking about? We're getting crazy in here. But sometimes you will have kids that get fixated on that, and sometimes, there's parts of it when you look at human behavior, just in general, in mental illness, you have to think there's a part, you have to figure out what is normal, and you have to figure out when something starts to interfere with daily functioning. That's going to be the big thing. So if a child is doing this all the time, then that's definitely something, that you're going to have to investigate with, ask your doctor. You may have to see a therapist. There's things that you could do, but that's kind of like a general rule that when it interferes with daily functioning, then, we really need to investigate it more, to see what's going on. So he says that sometimes kids, can get stuck in that stage. And that's where you'll hear that, and I'm sure you've heard it before, the Oedipus complex. Does anybody want to tell me what they think that is? I know you've heard that term before. You've got the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex. Boys are in love with their moms, yes. And so the Electra complex obviously is, in both of these stages that we're talking about, Oedipus complex and the Electra complex are during this phallic stage. Norman Bates. So what would the Electra complex be? Girls fall in love with their dad. And they don't like their moms. So weird. And then you'll get into, like, as they get to be adults, it makes me think of the person's laying on the couch and they're like, I don't know why I date people that remind me of my dad. And then he's going to go back to, you're in the phallic stage. Your daughter's in that phase. Oh, that's funny. And it's interesting when you study it and then you actually see it. That's really cool. And then there's two other stages. The latency stage, that usually begins about the time that those complexes are resolved, and it ends with puberty. And then there's the genital stage. It says this stage occurs from puberty to death. So we're in that stage. It involves mature sexuality. Freud always had a big emphasis on work ethic and the idea that work is a very important part of life, and reaching like your life goals. But he also talked a lot about being able to fully love, and he talked a lot about sexuality. I thought it was interesting when I was reading this, something I had never read before, where he thinks that the main source of anxiety comes from built up sexual energy, which he calls the libido. You've heard that term. So like he thinks that's where anxiety comes from. Freud thought that anxiety would arise when a sexual instinct sought expression but was blocked by the ego. So it made me look at anxiety a little bit different. Do you all have any questions about? There's so much on Freud. I do think it's really interesting where he talks about the things that happen to us as children affect us greatly in life. And have you heard of and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Have you heard of that? Yes. Because that goes along with these lines. The things that happen to us as a child not only affect us mentally, but they affect us on physical levels. So I thought it was really interesting because the ACEs study is very prominent now in social work. You hear people talk about it a lot, and it's been over 20 years ago that study took place, where it was actually a weight loss study, and they were trying to figure out why some people lost weight and some didn't. And then the data that came out of it was actually like something that didn't even have to do with weight loss. And it had to do with things that happen to us as children, like abuse, a parent being in jail, divorced parents. You know, there's a 10 questions that you answer. And, you know, it depends on what your score is. And it makes like all these other, like obesity, drug abuse, all these different things, health related concerns, you're at a greater risk because of the things that happened to you as a child. So I kind of see where you could put those two together a little bit. Okay, and I know I'm not going to cover, it's already 6:30 almost. I'm not going to cover all of these. So I'm going to go a little bit quicker on the other two that are really important in social work and psychology. Carl Rogers, he's another one that they talk about. I think it's on page 102. And he is credited with developing the client-centered therapy. And what's really important about that is it's based off of 3 principles. You are congruent with the client. And what that means is you put the client's beliefs, principles, values, their needs, all of that guides the therapy that you're providing them. It guides your clinical decisions. You provide unconditional, positive regard with them, and you're very empathetic. You're trying to understand where that client is. So it's very much like perspective taking. You're empathetic and you're trying to understand where that client is and give them positive feedback because that's going to empower them. And and it's not used a whole lot today. He died, I think, in 1986. It's still used. A small percentage of therapists still use client-centered therapy, but it was considered very groundbreaking at the time. So another one that I know you're familiar with is Piaget. I just like to say that, Piaget. He is on page 115. Piaget developed the 4 stages of cognitive development. And what he did was he studied children. And he observed how they learn, how they process information. He has 4 different stages. The first one is sensory motor. And where are they? They're in your book. They start on page 116 and they go into a whole lot of detail. But sensory motor, it kind of focuses on object permanence. You know, think about like a child that 18 to 24 months, you could actually do like you're playing peepie. You know, they start to figure out that you're going to come back, but it's still not concrete thinking. You know, you could still very much trick a child like that. And then you're not there, and then they're freaked out. That's just one example. But on page 116, it shows you the examples of, you have 2 different containers. They look exactly the same, and they have exactly the same amount of liquid. And then you take one container, you keep it, and then you take another container, and it's tall, but it contains the same amount of liquid. And it will go through the different, the different ages of children, and that they're at one point they understand that even though it looks different, it's the same amount of liquid in there. But when they are in, let's say the next stage is called pre-operational, they look at those 2 and they think that the taller one has more liquid. I don't have that concrete abstract thinking down. Does that make sense? Sheila, it's a good example it goes through on page 115. And And this is used a whole lot in education because teachers, psychologists, people that are working with children, they want to know what those developmental stages are. Because a lot of times theories like this help us. It talks a little bit later in this chapter about special ed and children who have disabilities. So we have to figure out what this looks like at this stage so that we can tell when it looks different, and it affects that, what we talked about, the daily functioning. He would call children little scientists, and he wanted to see how they explored and interact with the world. And that's how he came up with this, was watching the different ages of children. And he figured out how they think and reason differently at different periods in their life. So there's actually four. There's the third stage is concrete operational, 7 to 11, and then the last one is formal operational, and that is adolescence to adults. And that's where, in that adolescent stage, you begin to see that true abstract thinking. I think it's interesting, they talked just a little bit about another person that was big in child development is Vygotsky. I practiced that so I did not mess it up, because when you look at how it's spelled, it looks super scary to pronounce it. But it's Vygotsky. And he argued, which is interesting, I do like these theories about child development. He argued that social learning preceded cognitive development. So in his theories, he says that culture affects cognitive development and that it varies across cultures. And I don't know what you think on that. I have a tendency to lean more toward that one, I think, than just straight out, this is how a child learns this, regardless of I think I lean very much toward cultural influences and social learning. So I don't know, which side do you think you lean on? Do you lean more on the Piaget or the Vygotsky? Or then you got Freud in there, that I agree with a lot of stuff that he says too. And that is like what Natalie said. I always say on theory, I feel like you can take some from Freud. You can take, if it's going to help your client, it's good to have that foundational knowledge of the different theories, and how they really play a role in human behavior and why people do that. But on the last ones, especially Piaget and Vygotsky, learning, if you work with small children or children, period, you really want to be heavy on those theories, because it's going to help you learn those stages of development. It's just going to make you do your job, be able to do your job better and have more resources and understanding. All right, and I'm not going to be able to talk about a lot of the other stuff in here. The end of it, they do talk about special education. They talk about, in special education and learning disabilities, what that looks like in schools. I think it's said around 5% of students enrolled in public schools are in special education. Oh, I bet that was cool. It would be cool just to read, if you had like lots of leisure time, just to read all about Freud. I think that would be cool if they had a class just on Freud. I would like to take that. Okay, so we're going to have to move on. Does anybody have any questions on that? I left out a lot, but I know that the big ones in there, Freud, knowing the id, the ego, the superego, knowing Piaget, knowing a little bit about Vygotsky, and what was our other one? Carl. I lost my page. Carl Rogers. Even though, like that one, oh, I did forget. Oh, thank you. On Carl, even though that one's not used a whole lot now, it's still like you want to know, historically, you want to know when this person thought of this one and then why we shifted to this kind of thinking, and what it looks like now. Like I think toward the end of it, it will talk about some more current ones, but they all pull from those early ones. I can't imagine living in that time where you're just sitting around and you're like, I'm going to completely come up with a theory about child development. Like, I feel like we're so overwhelmed with knowledge now. Like, there's so much out there. I can't imagine what it was like in the very beginning to be thinking about those things when there was nothing out there. And there's probably still, there may be somebody in this class that comes up with a theory that has never existed. That's really cool to think about. Okay. I know most of my theories I don't get that excited about. Okay, so chapter 4 is going to be talking about social development in infancy and childhood. So it plays very nicely. It's a nice smooth transition from what we were talking about with the theories. It's very important for you all to know what socialization is. Can anybody want to take a stab at what you think socialization is when we're looking at development in infancy and childhood? And something while you're thinking about that, a lot when we were looking at the
are you saying
go
how the
ahead.
child socialize with
Say
other
that
people?
again.
Are you asking about how a child socialize with other people?
It's part of that, yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually it's when you think of the term socialization and you're looking at infancy and childhood, it is how a child learns everything, how they learn language, how they learn etiquette, how they learn, like Mary said, how do you play? How do you interact with other people? You learn your values, from the people that you're around, social expectations.
So primarily you learn that from home, but then when you go out in school, you learn it from your peers.
I think in the beginning, what this is talking about, most of it or a lot of it is learned from your home. Like it's learned from parents, parents, guardians, siblings that might be in the home, friends, that you play with. I think that school, like they have a whole lot of that prior to getting in school. One of the things I was going to say when you were looking at Freud, he says that, that decision-making ability of the superego, that's actually developed between ages 3 and 5. So that's probably most of the time, a lot of times prior to being in that school setting, you've already established how to figure out right and wrong things. And so it makes me think, okay, so how did you figure that out? Did you figure that out because your parents, your brother, let's say your brother's at the store and he's a little bit older than you and he just takes what he wants. So does that make you think that that's okay to do that too? Because that's all you may know.
Yeah, I feel like your parents number one, because if you know you have a strict parent, even if you want to do it, you're going to think about how my parents going to react to this.
And I also think religion could play a role in that. whether you go to church, whether you don't go to church, what your parents' spiritual beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it. Socialization is an important concept for you all to think about, and where that comes from, especially if you're working with kids. And I'm trying to think how to word that. Depending on what it is you're seeing them for, some of what they're doing is going to come, it's absolutely going to come from that socialization. So
Right.
you've got to be able to look at all of those elements in order to try to either stop that behavior, intervene with the family, do something.
I remember doing a class similar to this, and there was a teacher who was concerned about a little girl who she never really played a lot with a lot of people. You know, she's kind of like stuck to herself. And then they found out that in her culture, that's just how they are. There is nothing wrong with her. It's just a different culture.
Yeah, and I think that kind of is one of the, not the reading summary, but no, maybe it is the reading summary. Talks about in minority groups how culture can play a role in behaviors, and diversity, and how that affects how people act. And it's, you can talk about like that too, and what you're talking about, like she was fine. And I think as a social worker, it's your job to investigate those things sometimes, because one time it's going to be a cultural issue, and then the next time maybe there's some kind of neglect or abuse going on in the home.
Right.
So you have to be able to distinguish between those two. It talks a little bit about how families look different. Families don't look like they used to look. The married parents with 2.5 kids and a dog. That's not really the norm of society today.
Right. And it's not just man and woman anymore. You have, 2 male or two female.
And you have a lot of single parent homes. You also have a lot of blended families. I see that a lot. And sometimes that's a cultural issue where a lot of times Burmese families, or I was trying to think another one I worked with, where the older parents live with them. So they may have 10 people that live in an apartment, but they're, it's, to us, that might seem extremely cramped and all of this, but that's a cultural, so it's a cultural thing that's how they, from their country, they take care of cousins and brothers and grandparents, and they all live together in the one house.
So we, like in my household when I was growing up, it was my mom, my cousins, and just like a bunch of people in the house.
Oh, Sky, did you say something? Were you talking to me? I could see you talking, but I couldn't hear you.
Sorry, I was like, that's exactly right, because I'm.
Oh, I thought you doing like.
Yeah, I was like, that's exactly right. My grandmother, they live with my cousins, and they bought a 3-bedroom house, and I think there's like 9-10 people in there. So yeah, that is totally normal with Burmese people. So yes.
But like you saying that, some people, like if they don't have that cultural awareness, they're going to be like, oh, that's awful. They're so cramped and they have this. And I always try to think, I wonder what they think about us. Like people that use babysitters all the time, or do they think that we put our work, before family because we work all the time? Or I always wonder, like, what did they think about our own culture? Because a lot of the Burmese population I work with, sometimes they don't celebrate Christmas. Like that's just not, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And people will think, because you have a whole bunch of people in this house, we've got to get them Christmas. you know, and it becomes this debate of, are you pushing your own cultural values onto another family, trying to almost like Americanize them or whatever you want to say. So it can get a very interesting debate, you know, and of course you take on Christmas and, you know, it's like, they're like so thankful and grateful, but I always leave going, I wonder if they think that's weird. Like you just sat down a sack of toys or a sack of presents. So I don't know, but it is very interesting how we do that as social workers. So it talks a lot about how those families look. Families just look different. People don't get married as much. People may stay together, but they don't get married. And then lots of times it's, I think because of even economic, you know, financial reasons, you may have, like somebody may have a roommate and then that one person has 2 or 3 kids, but like that unit is still a family, you know, so we have to be very open to interpretations of what is considered family.
We have a lot of transgendered in our area.
Say that again.
We have a lot of transgendered families.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I just think you have to look at everything and everybody that's out there as far as what's considered family. And I know some people may not be close to their family, but they have friends, you know, they're closer to their friends and consider them family versus family they grew up with.
Home is where the heart is.
Yes, absolutely. And for, like Valerie said, you can have someone who's transgender that maybe their family did not accept that, you know, so they make another family that's made up of friends but they're closer to them than they were, you know, the family that actually raised them. So it's just very important to consider all definitions, you know, when it comes to what a family is. We already talked about a little bit. It goes into a lot of detail about the systems theory when we're looking at families, and we talked about what homeostasis is and what makes that run really smooth, and the inputs and the outputs, the communication that comes in and what goes out. It's on page 166 and goes for a couple pages on there. It goes into a lot more detail on that, because that's really important when you're working with anybody, to be able to understand family dynamics. You could be doing family therapy, group therapy, and that's going to help you to try to figure out what's going on, you know, what's making that homeostasis off and how can you get back there. I'm almost out of time. This chapter talks a lot about behavior. When I was reading this, it reminds me of a lot of stuff with schools, because you're looking at the ABCs of behavior. This is a lot of stuff that I feel like school psychologists work on. So with ABCs of behavior, which, you know, we're in human behavior, so I understand why it's in here. It's the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. Where's my state? Yeah, right there. So I'll give you an example. If I have a kid that is, he is reactive, he's very aggressive, I could use this, it's called operant behavior, to look at the ABCs of his behavior. So when an incident happens, I'm going to look I want to see what happened right before. What happened right before the behavior. And then when I can figure out that, then I'm going to I see this is the behavior, and then I want to see what happened afterwards. So I'm trying to give you a good example of how we fixed it one time. There was a kid that, when everybody was coming in the classroom, he always got really upset. And what was happening, it was somebody was pushing him or bumping him right when he got in, and he just flipped out. Like he would flip a chair, flip a table. But we had to study the ABCs of that behavior to figure out what was taking place before that behavior occurred. And it was, it was like a super easy fix. He got to go to the classroom 5 minutes before everybody else did and get settled, because he didn't handle all the stimulus that was going on, and it gave him a lot of anxiety, and he was very reactive when everybody was rushing in the door. And that would make his behavior was he got really upset and he throw his backpack, he would do all kinds of stuff. But it just took studying his behavior to figure out what was happening before. And then he got, his consequence was he got in trouble too after that. So looking at those 3 things, a lot of times in terms of behavior, you can figure out what's going on. You could change it. I love talking about working with kids and trying to do choices and positive reinforcement, because this chapter talks a ton about positive reinforcement. It talks about when people use rewards and how is that, what's the difference? Do people like praise? Like there's so much in here on behavior. Hold on, there's one other thing. On page 198, there is a spotlight on diversity. I think it goes through 201. And it talks about recognizing ethnic and cultural differences in families. And it talks about empowerment through strengths. And this might help you a little bit on some ideas when you're trying to research an article for that reading summary. So keep that in the back of your mind. Spotlight 4.3. At the very end of this chapter, it talks about examining child maltreatment. Talks about different characteristics of someone that is an abuser. What's really important is, as a social worker, we have a duty to report. So if you suspect abuse or neglect or sexual abuse, it's always, we are mandated reporters. And it goes over on page 219, different things that you look for. Characteristics of neglected children. If you're looking at physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect is always going to be the hardest to prove. You can have kids that come in and they are completely disgusting, dirty, haven't had a bath for days. I've been out on plenty of home visits that we might walk in and think, oh my gosh, we have to call child services right now. This is awful. But child services may come in and they, have to assess they're doing that assessment piece. They have a home, they have food. There's not evidence of physical abuse or sexual abuse. But when you get to that neglect piece, it's a little bit harder. Even though it could be like a dirty environment. I have been in houses that have had a hole in the floor where dirt's there. They haven't had bath in days. And that doesn't mean that the social worker is not going to work with them, but that doesn't, it's not a case that we're going to remove that kid right now. When you're looking at physical abuse, I think it gives you, I thought it gave you some characteristics in here. It talks about sexual abuse. Oh, yeah, I missed it. Oh, here it is. No, wait. Hold on one second. I know I'm running out of time. Oh, okay. On 215, characteristics of physically abused children. Bruising is always a big one. You have to think about where it is, like, because, kids fall, kids bump things all the time. if they have bruises on their abdomen, that is a big sign of, internal bleeding or something else going on internally, like, so the stomach area. If you say something like that, a social worker is probably going to come right out. Sometimes broken bones, burns. I've had kids before they were burned, and it was on the tips of their fingertips, and you could see that it was someone held their hand down on the stove. It wasn't oh, I touched it, oh, that was hot and I burnt my finger. It was every single fingertip was burnt. It was burnt in between the fingers. So burnt, and I've seen cigarette burns. Like, those are very easy to distinguish. It's almost a perfect circle. They have what's called, like what a boxer gets, cauliflower ear. Like, if you have bruising on the ears, that's a massive sign of physical abuse, because it's very difficult to injure the ears. Like, you have to be hit very hard to have the ear swollen or bruised or anything like that. So that's a very serious sign. I wish I had more time. I may have to talk about that a little bit next week if there's things that I missed, because we didn't really get to go over sexual abuse that much. Does anybody have any questions? I know, I feel like we covered like a billion things tonight. It was too much information for you all.
I have about the paper. So just finding one peer-reviewed article and writing 3 page summarizing the article.
Yes, it's a 2 to 3 page reading summary, and it's on Moodle. Like, it gives a good description of what you're looking for.
Oh yeah, I was looking at it, but
you still have to either do a quiz, or I think your other option is a paper.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was asking. Okay, so we do that. With that, do we have to when we're summarizing that, do we have to use like certain things like Freud and like that stuff? Put that in there? Is that what we're doing?
I don't think so. On the reading summary, it's just going to be you summarizing that article, like trying to go through there and pick out the highlights. And so really on a reading summary, I want it to be, I've never read this article before, so I want you to write a paper that's going to tell me what this article's about.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
We're not identifying anything from the lessons?
I can't pull it up. You're going to be talking about a little bit about minorities and cultural differences. I think it talks about that in there. Okay. And we talked, if you go back to those pages, page 198 through 201 in the Spotlight on Diversity, there might be some good, like if you need ideas on what to research and how to, what you want to write your paper on, I think that will have some good ideas for you.
So how far back does the article have to go?
Say that again.
How far back does the article have to go?
What do you mean by that?
How old do you want it to be? Like more current, 10 years?
Some
teachers specify
on there. I would think more current. I would want more current.
Like between 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I would say in the last 5. If you can find something in the last 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. It doesn't say, so if you find something that's a little bit older that you really like.
I wanted to make sure. So it has to be one article, or are we making a point and we can use other articles to make our points?
No, it's just one. It's just one that you're summarizing. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And then Bianca said, you're going to have that reading summary. And then you're also going to have either another paper or a quiz. You pick one of those.
Okay. And the discussion board, is that optional too, or is that, I didn't remember.
In the discussion board, I said in the beginning, like, since we were having options, I didn't want people to have to do the discussion board and then nobody else participated in it. So even though I can't take it off, I would rather you do the quiz or the paper when it comes to your two options.
Perfect. All right. Thank you.
All right. That's all I have for you guys. Thank you for sticking around. And I will see you next week.